Welcome into episode 334 of the Skate Podcast. I'm Brian DeFelice, joined by Bridget Prue and Scott McLaughlin. Today marks our first What If Wednesday episode where Bridget, Scott, and myself will be covering hypothetical situations that you, the listeners, will throw our way, as well as our own things that did or didn't happen and how it would have played out. And so, Bridget, Scott, before we get into all that, I wanted to throw it to you guys and see how you're doing, and if there's anything you wanted to talk about off the top here regarding the Bruins.
I'm doing great. I do have something I want to talk about, but it's not Bruins. In fact, my own little what if is, what if the great Scott in Alston never closed? Because news broke on Tuesday that it's coming back. One of my favorite music venues. They're reopening in a different location.
Is it because it's named after you? Is that why it's your favorite?
I mean, that's a big plus. And yes, you worded that correctly. It is named after me. I'm the great Scott that it was referring to. Okay. No, but I also love it because it was a very small venue, and like you were just really close to the artist, very low roof, just like a party scene dive. It was just like a concert in a dive bar, basically.
And that's Scott's scene.
Well, I was not expecting that.
It was for many, many years. Yeah.
He totally shocked us with that off the top.
Yeah.
Well, congratulations to you, Scott. How long has it been closed?
It was the victim of the pandemic, so probably almost 4 years.
All right, not too bad.
I thought Scott was going to flash us for a second there.
He started pulling his shirt up.
that was not part of the podcast prep we were just talking about. But
all right.
My God.
What if? I don't know.
Jeez. Yeah, no, I have no Bruins thoughts. I'm done for the episode. So.
All right, I thought you were going to start with Game of Thrones because we were talking about that. Or sorry, House of the Dragon, because that's.
Oh yeah, I have plenty of thoughts on that too. If we want to talk about that.
No. Okay. All right.
Well,
so
we don't want to step on the toes of the hashtag Dork podcast.
Yes.
True. But by the way, I will say this though. Hashtag Dork does recaps reviews of every episode right after it's live on YouTube, like right after it airs, and then goes to the podcast feed. But they do a really good job, Keith Davey and Chris Shine. So if people are watching House of the Dragon and are looking for content about it, there you go. It's right there in the WEI Odyssey family. Hashtag Dork.
Wow, what a perfect segue. So guys, to the Bruins stuff that we want to talk about. We got a few emails, just regular, almost like mailbag questions, I guess. We'll do a few at the top. And then we got a bunch of what ifs, mostly on our YouTube from the last video and from Twitter. We put a post out, and obviously we'll be doing these throughout the summer. Not sure if we're going to do them into the season yet, because usually there's so much to talk about. Like maybe we'll throw some in here and there, maybe like one per Wednesday episode. But anyway, we got a lot for the first episode, and we're keeping the theme of this one to like the last two seasons, because we got a lot of 2023 playoff what ifs, as you could probably imagine. That's what we were going to get. But to start off, we're going to get to the emails, because there was some news that came out of the Bruins today, and it had to do with the Prospects Challenge. And Scott, you wanted to answer this one.
Yeah. Do you have the question up?
Yes. So this was a question from Kim. She said, as a fan, I wasn't around at this time last year. Can you explain what the Prospects Challenge is on the upcoming podcast? I'm confused about which players will be participating and what the purpose is. Thanks.
Yeah, so the Prospects Challenge is tied into rookie camp, which starts the week before the Bruins' main training camp. And rookie camp is basically, first, second, third year pros, but guys who haven't played in the NHL yet, but who are going to be in either Providence or with the Maine Mariners in the ECHL. So it does not include guys like prospects playing college hockey or major juniors, because they're already going to be with their respective teams by that point. So some prospects will have aged out. There's usually a couple guys who they are maybe like on the fence about, do they need to be at rookie camp? Do they need to go to the Prospects Challenge? depending on age or pro experience. Like last year, I think there was some debate about whether Johnny Beecher was going to go, but he ended up going. He went to rookie camp. He went to the Prospects Challenge, and it seemed like it ended up being a good thing for him because he played well there. This year I think of like Fabian Lysell, Georgi Merkulov are probably on that bubble where it's like they're going to be at main training camp. A week later, do they really need it? Like I'm sure the Bruins are going to be having internal conversations about that, but other guys who, don't have 2 full years in Providence under their belt, like those guys will definitely be there. And then there's usually a couple invites as well. Like free agents who aren't signed to minor league deals yet, guys that they might want to take a look at, see if they're going to add them maybe on an HL or ECHL deal. So that's sort of the overview of it and the purpose that it serves. So like, you're not going to see Dean Letourneau there. Like he's already going to be a BC or any of their other draft picks this year, but you will see draft picks from the last few years.
Yeah. And for people wondering the schedule, that's what the Bruins tweeted out today. It's going to be September 13th through the 16th. They'll play 3 games. Not sure whether or not they're streaming it. I feel like I watched it on some like very strange stream last year that I just had to like find on the internet. It wasn't like an official anywhere. Like it just was like maybe one of those barn cameras. But
usually it does end up somewhere. And a lot of time, I know in years past, I don't know if it's been every year, but it's been the Buffalo Sabres website that streams it because it's that they host it. It's in Buffalo every year. But yeah, they haven't announced anything about where it might be streaming.
Yeah, that's the one annoying thing, just because I like we have such a like limited opportunities to see the prospects that it's like, and also you're kind of ramping up to hockey season because at this point in the summer, I'm sure I'm not the only one that's like when's hockey season coming. So it's kind of a good primer. I wish it was. I just hope it's easy to find and to stream. Brian, did you have anything to add, or should I get to the next question?
Well, I was just thinking it's amazing that we live in a world where if you want to stream a beer league game at Hockey Town, you can go on Live Barn, but you can't stream a Bruins prospect tournament. It seems a little ass backwards to me, and that's no disrespect to all the men's leaguers out there, but yeah, definitely got to get a stream for these.
Do you still play men's league? Can we watch you?
Oh, no, I played this past winter, but that was my first time skating in a couple of years.
I got to get knee surgery, then maybe I'll be back at it. But yeah.
The last time, so I stopped. The last time I skated prior to this past like January was in right before COVID when I was coaching, and then I hadn't skated in 4 years. By far the longest I gone in my life. I felt like you never think this would happen, but I go on the ice and you feel like Bambi. It's like it's amazing. Like 4 years is a long time. Like you can go a few months here and there, but I got on the ice. I was like, oh boy, this is gonna be a tough first game back. But it's like riding a bike. It's riding a bike,
Okay, good. Hopefully that happens for me too, because I've needed ACL surgery since 2020. I'm finally gonna get it in September, hopefully. So
when
we'll be back at it.
We had the media skate at Fenway. Like that was
I
year,
skated
the
that.
Classic.
Yep.
That was the first time I'd been on the ice in like 3 years, and also the first time since I had broken my leg. And that was like totally foreign. I was like, do I even remember how to do this? Like, this feels so strange.
Scott, could you tell that I had a messed up ACL when I was out there? I fought through it.
I can't say I was like really analyzing your stride.
Come on. I
wasn't paying.
I was making sure you were, your crossovers were nice and crisp and everything, but all right.
No, wasn't watching as closely as like Dean Letourneau at development camp. So.
Okay. Well, next time, next Mediascape. There used to be a media game too, but anyway, we digress, which happens a lot in the summer. So next question that we got was from Remy, and they said, we've all heard how the second line right wing will likely have a bit of a rotating door effect for the first couple of months and possibly longer. My question is, Do you guys see a scenario where Mason Lohrei elevates his game so much that Hampus Lindholm becomes a trade chip at the deadline? Don't get me wrong, I absolutely love what Hampus Lindholm brings, but if Lohrei proves to be a reliable first or second pairing lefty, I could see a scenario where Hampus possibly gets traded back to his old team in exchange for a guy like Frank Vetrano, Frankie V, UMass, and possibly a depth defenseman. I know he was a 15, or he says, I think he was a 15-team no trade list, and not sure if Anaheim would be a trade partner. I just don't see anybody else on the roster being a legitimate trade chip unless Korpisalo has a strong first half. So, a lot there. I feel like a lot of our questions are Mason Lohrei, which I like. I think there's so much optimism in what Mason Lohrei can be in a short amount of time, and that's where a lot of these questions come from.
Yeah, I mean, I appreciate the question, and when it comes to making your team better at the deadline for a contending team, generally speaking, I'm open to hearing anything, but and I understand that this question is prefaced on the fact that Lohrei just really emerges onto the scene. But that said, personally, I just as I speak right now in July, I don't have any interest in worsening what I believe is the team's biggest strength, which is their blue line depth right now, and I just don't think it doesn't entice me really to make that worse because you have an emerging player. In my mind, the more the merrier. Like have the two of them as part of a really elite top four.
Yeah, exactly. Like if Lohrei breaks through like that, that's awesome. But that just makes you better. Like it doesn't make Hampus Lindholm expendable. It just makes you even deeper. And let's remember too that Nikita Zadorov, as much as we all like the signing, even if we quibble a little over the years or money, he has mostly been a third pairing defenseman in his career. Like he's moved up to the top four in Calgary and then in Vancouver this year. So clearly he can, and I think we're all penciling him in for top four duties to start. But a world where Lindholm and Lohrei are actually your top two on the left side, and Zadorov slides down to the third pairing, that's great. Like that's a perfect lineup. So, it's not like you need to move someone out because they're not going to be getting enough minutes or something.
Yeah.
And as far as sorry, my last point was as far as like what you could possibly trade away to upgrade something else. Picks. That's what you can trade away, and because you have them now. Like you got back into the first round to get Letourneau this year, and for the first time in several years, you now own all of your first round picks moving forward. So those are back on the table, and that's how you go get that scoring wing if you need it.
Yeah, and that's what they got back from the Ullmark trade. So that's where the pick comes from. And what I was going to say was basically we all think this team is a playoff team. So you're going to be buyers rather than sellers. So I know, like, of course, Hampus Lindholm would have a lot of value, but you are trying to strengthen your roster at that point in time. Usually you're not trading assets unless it's like a bottom of the lineup guy or prospect. You're not trading players, roster players, usually at the deadline, unless it's a huge, crazy trade. But yeah, you're going to have to find a different way. And like Scott mentioned, if you think about all the big trade deadline moves the Bruins have made the past few seasons, including to get Hampus Lindholm, it's involved the first round pick usually. So that's more likely what you would see. And I just think Hampus Lindholm is too good to want to move as well. I like him. I wouldn't want to trade him. Brian?
Yeah, no, like I said off the top, I'm not interested in trading Lindholm for the reasons that we've all just mentioned. So yeah, I think if Lohrei emerges, all the merrier. Yeah, and Scott's point about the draft collateral being back on the table as much as anybody else in the league, that's a very good point. So I'm in agreement with you guys there.
All right,
and I would also just remind people, like, the Bruins will also be able to accrue cap space during the season this year, as long as they don't have anyone on long-term injured reserve. That's something they couldn't do last year because Milan Lucic spent the entire season on long-term injured reserve after like the first 3 games or however many he played. So the Bruins never added any more cap space during the year, which really hampered them at the deadline in terms of what they could add. Like last year, it really had to be salary in, salary out. And unless the Bruins go into LTIR again, that shouldn't be the case this year.
Which obviously is one of those unpredictable things every season. But so let's get to our What If Wednesday questions. Like I mentioned off the top, kind of, I think all of these are from the 2023 season. And I'll start with mine. That was one of the first things that came to mind when we talked about having a What If Wednesday. And I wanted to make it kind of like relevant to the present. And so my question is, what if Bergeron didn't retire at the end of the 2023 season? What if he let his last year be the centennial season, which we kind of thought he would try to play that 100th year as captain, but he stepped away. And so my question is, if Bergeron played the centennial season last season, did they make it any further in the playoffs?
It's a great what if, because I think there's like a lot of directions this goes. And honestly, like before I even get to do they go further this year, I'll start at last summer, because I think it changes how they approach last offseason. Presumably Bergeron would sign a contract similar to the one he signed for the 22-23 season, which is low cap hit that year, but probably with a few million in bonuses that he can make that would carry over to the next year. So you'd have him on another, affordable contract for that season. Then how do you spend the rest of your money? Like, they still wouldn't have a whole lot of cap space, but do you, part of the reason they went after veterans last year, like Shattenkirk, Van Riemsdyk, Lucic, even though he didn't work out, was to help fill some of that leadership void. So would that still have been the approach? Because, hey, those guys are cheaper than, maybe they would have gotten if they were 5 years younger? Or do you maybe try to get someone a little younger because you're not worried about leadership if Bergeron's back as your captain and you still have Marchand and McAvoy as alternates and Pasternak there and Coyle and all that? Like, you're not as worried about bringing in a couple more veteran voices. So I'll start there, but I think right off the bat, like, it potentially changes your entire summer last year.
Yeah, and in addition to that, I think part of that change is that I don't think Matt Patra breaks through to the NHL roster last year because there's not a spot for him. There's no opportunity for him, because you would have probably initially Zacha at 2C and Coyle at 3C or something like that, and the opening wouldn't have been there for him. The opportunity would have been there for him. So
that was one of the first things I thought of.
Yeah.
I was like, some of the younger, prospects, if guys don't retire, don't get the chance. Exactly.
And so any strides that Patra made last year in his first year as a pro, even though it was short-lived due to injury, that's all positive progress and positive experience that he can take going into next year. So things that he's currently working on this summer is because he had trial and error last year to learn what he has to get better at. So Patra's development and making that first year and going forward, I think it just got accelerated because of Bergeron not being on the team last year. And Scott mentions the playoff results. We can maybe put a pin in that for a second, but Scott just made me think of something. If the Bruins did re-sign Bergeron last year, it would have been bonus incentives again that he probably would have hit, right? So if he hit those bonus overages, the Bruins would be paying for it right now and maybe wouldn't have had the same dollars to go out and acquire Zadorov and Lindholm this current offseason, assuming Bergeron retired after the centennial season.
Yeah, but I still think that there was there was an opening to still sign Lindholm if Bergeron had retired, but he would have had to retire, in a timely way where you had time to negotiate and try to bring Lindholm in. But
I'm saying that being able to acquire both of them.
Oh, yeah, cap. I feel like they could have maybe, maneuvered a different way. But anyway, some of the other stuff that comes to mind if Bergeron was on the team would be that, that question mark for last season at center wouldn't have existed. And you didn't have to force Zacha to take time at center. And you could have, kept him at wing, which is where it looks like he'll be this upcoming season as well. I also think that it's important to note in this conversation how healthy he would have been, right? So I feel like right now we're kind of just going under the assumption he would have been fully healthy, which at the very end of the last regular season before the Montreal game, I was like, this guy looks completely healthy. Everything looks fine. He could go another season, was keeping up perfectly fine. He wasn't like one of those older players where you're like, oh no, it's falling off. I don't think that's where he was. I think he was still healthy and prepped and just, still able to be that Bergeron that we all know. But, and this is another what if Patrice Bergeron didn't play the last game of the regular season, re-injure his back, and now maybe that affected his decision to retire and he didn't feel as good. And, that changes our what if question as well, because if he wasn't healthy and that back injury lingered, maybe he doesn't have a good season in the first place. And we're not talking about, him maybe helping them get further in the playoffs.
Yeah, all good points. Brian, you got me thinking too, that the way it would affect even now this coming season with, another bonus overage situation and, would you have the money to go in Lindholm? And it's it almost feels like maybe everything just gets pushed back a year where Poitras doesn't have the chance last year. So maybe this becomes the Poitras breakthrough year. And maybe you don't go as hard at Lindholm because you think, well, we're going to give Zacha and Coyle a shot and see how they maybe this becomes the season that you give them a shot and learn that, okay, they're going to do pretty well in the regular season, but it wasn't good enough in the playoffs. That maybe all gets kicked a year down the road. So it's, Bergeron retiring, it's not a good thing. They would have been I think they would have been a better team last year with him, to state the obvious and to finally get back to the question of, do they go further? Or I don't know if they go further, but I think they're better equipped. I think Bergeron does a better job against Barkov than any Bruins center did in the second round this year. Again, assuming he's healthy, which, yes, you're right, Bridge. We can't assume that. He was getting older. He did break down at the end of the previous season. So that is a thing that happens with older players. You can't guarantee that. But, for the sake of discussion, if we assume that he did hold up, he's going to do a better job against Barkov. So right there, you have a better chance. Doesn't mean you beat the Panthers and go on and win the cup or whatever. I don't know, but I think you make it more of a series. But
and also, how does he help talk players through some of that the early part of that Panther series was fights and Pasternak was fighting and it hit a level, a different tone. And there's an animosity from the season before, but if you have a captain like Bergeron, does the animosity not fly through the roof like that? Because Brad Marchand's a super emotional player and an emotional captain, whereas Patrice Bergeron is more let's take this down. So it's just the personalities and how that whole series could have been talked through, coached through by, within the locker room by the players could have been different too.
Or does Marchand fly off the hook because he's not the captain and he doesn't have to monitor himself quite as much.
True.
Well, and that's another effect that, happen. I mean, if Bergeron plays the centennial season, Brad Marchand doesn't get his first year of captaincy under his belt. And so it just seems like, again, it's really difficult to say what would happen in the playoffs if Bergeron was still there. My gut and my head both tell me the Bruins weren't winning the cup regardless if Bergeron was there last year. So whether or not to beat the Panthers and go to the conference finals against the Rangers. And I mean, if you beat the Panthers, they are the eventual cup winner. So I guess the Bruins would have a chance, but I still didn't see them beating Florida. But what I can say is that, yes, the Bruins would have had a better chance last year, but it just seems like if Bergeron played the centennial season, beyond that season, it just would have decelerated the Bruins, future evolution, right? I mean, Brad Marchand now has his second year as a captain coming up. Matt Poitras has his second year as an NHL player coming up, and just McAvoy and Pastrnak just another year without Bergeron and being those true leaders. Like, it just kind of seems like everything. Yeah, to Scott's point, like maybe this is that quote unquote bridge year that they had to do last year, and so I guess that's the what if. To sit here and say they would have won the cup, I mean, I don't know.
Well, that's the point of What If Wednesday. It's like you're taking your best guess, right? Like you're taking your best guess at it. You're using the information that we have, the stats we have, what we see, to try to make a somewhat educated guess of the future. But we will never know. And you know what, guys, I heard hosts on our own station at the end of last season, and there was some fans that had this sentiment as well, that Bergeron really wasn't healthy enough to help, or they were skeptical of keeping the old. They wanted the new, and they got the new. So I do remember that being something that was said at the end of last season. Yeah. And I'm just curious, like, if our listeners were happy that he retired when he did, or would they have liked to have just watch another season of Bergeron for the centennial year? So I personally would have enjoyed that, I think. So anyway, that was our first what if.
I guess for a concrete answer for me on the what if, as far as how far they would have gone, I don't think they would have gone any further than they did. I think they would have at the most just won a series, just like they did last year. I think the way to get there would have probably been different. The Bruins roster itself would have been comprised differently. Charlie Coyle probably doesn't have the season he had because he's not forced into that situation. Like, certain players don't elevate the way that they did. The personnel is probably different, but I still think the ceiling for the team that would have been in place would have been around victory, and then probably out in the second round. So I don't think the ceiling probably changed all that much in hindsight.
Yeah, I agree. I don't think the ceiling would have, I mean, regular season, like, I don't know if you steal extra wins if you have Bergeron. Like, there was more wins to be had, but like, goaltending was huge in getting the wins that they did. And obviously the entire season is different. Not a single game is the same if Bergeron's on the roster. So it's hard.
Yeah, I think, like, defensively they're better. There were definitely times last year where, we saw them give up a lot of chances and spend a lot of time in their own zone. And it's like, those are the things that Bergeron was so good at. It's why he won the Selke Trophy again in his final season, was just like killing possessions quicker. Could have been so big for that Bruins team this past year. But, even that, like, in the playoffs, they really didn't give up a ton of high danger chances in that Florida series. Like, they still spent time in their own zone for sure. And we know there were periods they only got 1 or 2 shots on goal, which was a product of spending too much time in their own zone.
And not winning faceoffs. And
yeah, like all of that. Like, all that improves with Bergeron. But I kind of come down to in the same spot as you guys, where it's like, all right, maybe they take Florida to 7, but I still just think that Florida team was better top to bottom. So I would, if I had to pick, I'd say maybe they go 1 game further, and that's it.
Yeah. So not a huge difference. And our next what if is, this is Brian's, but also we got it submitted from the Tape to Tape podcast, aka Maria from Watertown, which is, what if Marchand buries the breakaway against Bobrovsky in Game 5 in 2023 against the Panthers, with seconds left in the third period. And I think this is one moment that we kind of remember. It's stuck in my mind. I was there, like Scott and I were sitting pretty much directly over the net for that, and I still can see it in my head. And I think that was a moment that it seemed like everything would have been different for that playoff run. Like that would have ended the entire series. That would have been just, it would have taken the roof down, right? TD Garden, like it would have caved in. That's how monumental that shot, if it had went in, that goal would have been. And you get past the Panthers, and who knows, rest could be history, could be a Stanley Cup on the horizon for that team, just with the roster that they had.
Yeah, I mean, the obvious first answer to this what if question is the Bruins win the series. As you pointed out, Bridget, with no time remaining in Game 5, it was essentially an overtime goal that Brad Marchand would have scored, and what would have ensued would be that the Florida Panthers' 2-year run wouldn't be a thing. The state of Florida going to 5 consecutive Cup finals wouldn't be a thing. But more importantly, I just remember going into that playoff series, we talked about it. That Florida Panthers team was not an 8 seed on paper, and they certainly weren't an 8 seed on the ice. And I was nervous for that series going into it because the Bruins just hadn't been playing great heading into it. Florida had been playing for their playoff lives for months, and their roster was much, much better than their seeding. And even still, I still thought the Bruins should have won the series. And I was just hoping and praying that the Bruins would get through that first round to get rid of the narrative of potentially choking in the first round, and they wouldn't be playing so tight afterwards. And then they could get back to playing that style of hockey that made them so dominant. And I think if Brad Marchand scores that goal, that would have alleviated a lot of nerves and tension in that Bruins dressing room to not be that team, to have that record, that season record-setting season, and then lose in the first round. That would have all gone away. And I think they would have made quick work of Toronto in round 2. Maybe not quick work because it always goes 7, but they would have gotten through Toronto, I believe, in round 2. The conference finals against Carolina, I think, would have been an absolute dogfight, but I have no reason to think that Bruins team couldn't have beaten them. And I think you're looking at a Stanley Cup matchup with the Boston Bruins and the coach that they just fired in Bruce Cassidy. And I'll throw it to you guys. Boston versus Vegas in that Stanley Cup final. I'm not confident the Bruins would have won, but it would have been an absolute heavyweight match.
Well, first off, and most importantly, what it would have done is it would have made my prediction of the Bruins sweeping that series look a lot less stupid if they had won in 5 games.
Right, gentleman's sweep.
Yeah. No, but the other big thing it would have done is, because I would have had real concerns about how Bergeron and Krejci would have held up for a long playoff run, given that they were both injured going into the playoffs, and certainly were not fully recovered by the end of that series. We're not even close to 100%. I don't think you get closer to 100% by playing more playoff hockey. You just battle through and fight your way through and give whatever you can. But if they win had they won in 7, then you're immediately turning around, starting in a new series. There's no rest for those guys. If you win in 5, there's at least some rest there between rounds 1 and 2, where I still don't think they're not going to get completely healthy, but that helps a lot more to set you up for a run. Like, at least it gets them a little bit of built-in rest, and maybe sets you up to go on a cup run where they can hold up. So that also would have been really important. Whether they beat Vegas or not, so much of that just comes, those guys in particular, but also other guys, like, who's healthy and how healthy are they, and how effective are they? How close are they to their usual selves? Because I can tell you right now, like, if Bergeron and Krejci re-aggravate those injuries and it gets to a point where they just can't play, you're not beating Vegas without those 2 guys. So if they can fight through and they hold up all right, then you have a chance. Because think about what did end up happening in that Cup final. It really wasn't even a series, guys, because the Panthers were so banged up and had so many top players either playing at like 50% or just unable to play. I mean, by the end, Kachuk was out, Ekblad was out, Montour was out. Like, they had no chance. There was never any chance of them making that even a remotely close series. And Vegas just rolled them. So if you got there limping the same way, the same thing would have happened.
Yeah.
Had you gotten there with some level of health, yeah, you definitely have a chance.
And if you had played a Panthers team that looked like you just described, that you would have gone, you would have gone past them either way. But I mean, first of all, Scott and I would have got to go to Vegas. That would have been fun. Brian, you would have been invited too, of course, if you wanted to go. But it would have worked out like the perfect narrative. Like, if the year had gone the way that I had thought it would, that's where I was thinking. I was like, oh man, this could be fun. Like, we could actually have a really deep run. We could follow this team. And witness history, really. Like, I thought that's where we were heading last year. I was like, I might be in the building for, a Stanley Cup, which was exciting. And obviously it fell short of that. And then you no longer have the players that were on that team. Like, Taylor Hall's gone, Bertuzzi's gone. Like, some of those moves you made at the trade deadline affected you because you lost another first round draft pick and you never end up re-signing any of the guys that you added at the deadline. And it's just, it also is just one piece of what could have, because there were many things that could have been different that would have had the Bruins on to the next round, because they had many chances to take that series, not just in game 5, not just with Marchand, and I know I've said this before, right when it happened, if he had a few extra seconds, I think he gets a better shot off, but I think he thought that he didn't have like any time left and just wanted to get something on net. Like, in real time, sitting there watching it in real time, I didn't know whether or not he was getting it off in time. And obviously that factors into the quality of shot that you get. If he's coming down the ice with 10 or 15 seconds left, rather than trying to shoot with 3 seconds left, it's a different shot. It's a different move. And I know people blame him for this, but like, that is really hard to try to calculate, and it's in your mind, and it would have been so huge if he did it. But one of the follow-up questions to this, which is another good point, is which was tweeted at us by Michael Wiseman. He said, what if Ullmark doesn't cough up the puck in overtime in the same game? Which is another memory that I have that happened directly beneath us that was, I will never forget seeing it. Like, it, once again, I have a very visual memory. Like, I see things, like, again, if I'm thinking about them, and that's one of them that just sticks with me.
Yeah, I mean, if Ullmark doesn't do that, it's back to a 50-50 match. Like, I don't know who finds that balance. Obviously, the Bruins live to fight another couple of minutes if he doesn't do that.
Yeah, but if you lose on a goal that wasn't that, like, awful, like, I feel like it changed the mentality of what was about to happen. Like, it was the beginning of the end.
Yeah, and I mean, so what should have happened, and I said this at the time, was Swayman should have started that next game. So if Ullmark doesn't make that blunder and the Panthers find another way to win, maybe Ullmark plays again in game 6 anyway, but it's not as questioned. Maybe the goaltending doesn't become as much of a story. I don't know. But I mean, I thought Swayman, after that game, and I like Linus Ullmark. I liked him when he was here, and I appreciate him as a player. But after that game, I said this on the podcast at the time, recapping that game. I didn't like his post-game press conference where he was in the scrum with you guys, and somebody asked how he was feeling, and he was like, I'm doing great. Why? You know what I mean? And I know what he was doing. He was trying to, like, deflect, and he was trying not to show his emotion and give anything to the media. But in the moment, I said, if that was Swayman, he would have owned up to it and said, I need to be better. And that was really, for me, when I said to myself personally, Jeremy Swayman has the demeanor and the attitude that I want to see in net for the Boston Bruins for years to come. So if Ullmark doesn't make that blunder, the Bruins possibly win the game, right? So that's a possibility too.
Yeah, Matt Grzelcyk doesn't get thrown under the bus and benched the next game, because it seemed like he was the one who got blamed for that instead of Ullmark, because he was the one who came out. Ullmark stayed in the lineup. If you remember, Connor Clifton had a disastrous game 6 after going in for Grzelcyk. So that's one. And the Ullmark part of it is, whether it's this play or the Marchand thing, like, that's another really interesting part of this, because if the Bruins win game 5, Ullmark remains the starter. Maybe he recovers, bounces back, gets the rest he needs, because remember, he was a little banged up as well. What if he ends up being your starting goalie on a long playoff run, and then this year they split time again, they have the same really good regular seasons that they did have? Ullmark's probably your game 1 starter, because you would look back and be like, he just led us on a deep run last year. Why do we go with Swayman? So it probably would have been Ullmark's net again this postseason. And then depending on how that goes, do you trade him away? Like, the whole butterfly effect of like all the different ways that this goes. That would have been another really interesting part of it. Does the goalie situation play out the same way? Like, are we talking about this being Swayman's team now, or is it still Ullmark as the 1 and Swayman as the 1A?
Well, and maybe, and it's really tough to know this, because we know that Ullmark had his no movement clause, or his modified no movement clause. But I mean, if he ended up going on a really strong playoff run, in addition to winning the Vezina, I don't know if that makes him just too good to pass up for a team that was on his list. Like, maybe the postseason collapsed by the Bruins as a team. Maybe it just made teams a little scared on that they'd be buying high on Ullmark. Like, I don't know. I'm not really sure if a strong postseason made him just too good to pass up. Maybe teams were like, he was amazing in the regular season, but that playoff was a little something, huh? So I don't know. You just never know.
If he has a solid rest of the playoffs, like assuming they make it past that game 5, and they move on, like, if he has a solid rest of the playoffs and Swayman doesn't get, like, you just don't even really see him unless there's like a maintenance day or something like that. Like, how hard would it be to trade away a goalie that either makes it to the finals or wins a Stanley Cup, like, that short after doing it? It's not really something you see teams do. So then you're talking about trading Swayman at this point, probably, because he's a restricted free agent, but he wants so much money. Like, you're either hitting arbitration again, or you're going to have to try to move him. Maybe he becomes a piece to get your picks back. I don't know, because at that point Swayman wouldn't be proven the same way that he is now either, because he would be getting less reps, and the question mark would be like, what does it look like if Swayman starts a series? Like, we wouldn't know that answer the way that we do now after he won against Toronto in the first round, and we've seen the sample size of him in the playoffs.
Or you just run it back through the final year of Ullmark's contract, because Swayman's not getting as much money because he hasn't had.
Brian would have the tattoo. Brian would have the tattoo, the goalie tandem tattoo that I photoshopped.
I will say this about the Marchand what if, though, just jumping back a second. Had Marchand scored that goal, the series would have ended. True. I'm still adamant to this day that even though he didn't score that, they still shouldn't have lost that series. That game 6 defensively was an abomination. And Scott, you mentioned Clifton, he had that turnover, but the Bruins had multiple leads in that third period against Florida in game 6 down in Sunrise. And to let that game get away, to come out in game 7 and go down, whatever it was, 2-0 and look pretty sluggish in the first 4. Like, that's just this type of shit that just, like, the Marchand goal aside, that's just inexcusable, unacceptable. And I hate to reopen and rip off this Band-Aid again. But that's the one thing I do know for sure is, like, the Marchand goal would have ended the series, but it still should have not gotten to what ended up happening. And that's
there's
I don't want to look at
things.
the Marchand breakaway that he didn't score and use that as an excuse to like no, there was still 2 full games afterwards that they choked away.
I don't even think that's close to, like, in my mind, to being like the key moment that they should have that they like that was their best chance. Like, it wasn't their best chance. I'm just saying that right now. Any shot you take with 3 seconds left in the game probably isn't your best chance. It's just your most noticeable chance. Like,
it he still got a hard shot off, and Marchand has scored from distances further than that in his career.
But
So
just think about the way you're like, your mentality is different.
Oh, you're right. He would have loved a few more seconds, but I'm just saying, like, him not capitalizing there, albeit time not being on his side, it's not.
Certainly wasn't.
It opened the door. It opened the door for future life for Florida, but it's not the reason the Bruins lost the series. That's for sure.
I mean, how about don't let Game 7 go to overtime? I don't know.
Yeah, it takes a lot of moments for a collapse like that to happen.
It was, and we watched it all, and we were a little traumatized for that. So, any more thoughts on that series? What ifs? That was the ones that we had written down. I have one more from last season / this off season. If you want me to get to that one, and it has to do with guys that played on the 2023 season that did not stick with Boston for the next season, and just how much turnover there was after that collapse. Like, there was so much. And it kind of felt like your trade deadline, like, you wouldn't change it because you at the time had no idea that was going to happen. But like, it was just hard to watch everybody that you traded for leave after. And it was hard to watch guys that I know fans liked go, like Taylor Hall and Nick Foligno. So my other hypothetical, or this could be our last one if you want, what if from last season / off season is, if the Bruins had the cap space to keep a player from the 2022-23 team that left in free agency or via trade, who would you have liked to see back? And I put Hall, Bertuzzi, Orlov, or Foligno, but maybe there's another person that you're thinking of. I'm going to let you guys answer first. Like, if they had the cap space, who would you want them to have brought back that would have made this year's team more of a contender?
For me, it's Tyler Bertuzzi. Even though I probably didn't love him as much as some fans, because as we talked about him here, like, I pretty consistently highlighted the defensive warts, which we also saw in the playoffs. But I think if you get him for a full season and get him, right from camp and preseason, I think you can smooth out a lot of those rough edges and at least get him to a point where he's more comfortable in your system and has cleaned up the defense quite a bit. And, he's that, even if his ceiling isn't, like, whatever, even if he's not, a 70-point guy or something, like, he's the top 6 wing that this team was missing this past season and that they're still going to be missing going into next season. And just the edge that he plays with, I think, helps as well. Like, we see the Bruins this offseason target guys who play with an edge. So clearly it's something they value. And I just feel like he really, really fit that mold. And, we all kind of thought at the time when we saw them making trades to free up cap space, like dumping Taylor Hall to Chicago, we thought there was a decent chance that was to re-sign Bertuzzi. And, as it turned out, they still didn't really have the cap space to do that. He thought he was getting more in free agency. He had to settle for a 1-year deal. That whole kind of debacle where it seemed like everyone sort of misread the situation. And the Bruins had already moved on and made other plans. But he would be the player for me that I just think was a good fit, even if the player himself is a bit imperfect.
Yeah, and I think every player is imperfect in their own way. So I agree with everything you said, Scott. I too would have liked to have kept Bertuzzi simply for the fact that Orlov just didn't need him. Like, I think you have Mason Lohrei on the horizon heading into last season. Now he's on the scene, and I just don't think he's a good luxury player to have. But when he came to Boston, he played great. But he did kind of create a bit of a logjam. And I feel like some of the Bruins defensemen kind of didn't know what their role was anymore. So Orlov is a good player, and he had a really good time, really good stint in Boston. But I didn't need him going forward. Hathaway, no. Taylor Hall, like, really good player. Obviously liked his time in Boston, but his age and his injury history, as seen last year in Chicago, just not something that you want to sign up for long term. And then,
and I mean, this is obviously considering like he doesn't get like in this scenario, like he doesn't get injured immediately, like he plays a season.
Yeah, I would still go with Bertuzzi for the reasons that Scott outlined. What's interesting is
so nobody's picking Clifton or Nosek.
No, and I'm not picking Foligno either. But what's interesting is that you can see Craig Smith, Nick Foligno, Taylor Hall, and Tyler Bertuzzi all play for the Chicago Blackhawks as teammates. And I might be missing somebody else as a former Bruin over there too. So it's funny how they are all Bertuzzi went to Toronto, but now he's joining the other guys in Chicago. So if you miss the Bruins connection with those players, just watch some Blackhawks games.
It's true. It's true. It's like a lot of familiar faces over there. So for me, it's between Bertuzzi and Hall. I am going to just explain why Taylor Hall might have made a difference this season, because you guys already kind of covered what Bertuzzi could have done. And I also wasn't his biggest, Bertuzzi's biggest fan, just because I thought that some of the plays that could have ended the series were actually defensive mistakes or passes that he made that ended up with pucks in the back of the Bruins net. But, and I also think they never found his spot. But obviously having another wing, which is what we've been talking about, where they're lacking now, where they're missing now. But who knows? Maybe he's not even here for next season. Maybe he signs a 1-year deal the same way he did in Toronto, and you're back to the same question mark, this offseason. But I'm just going to explain why Taylor Hall might have made a difference. And also, like, I just found him to be nice guy, like great interview, always accountable. And he's a good middle six forward, right? Like Bertuzzi.
Are you suggesting that Tyler Bertuzzi's 2-word answers didn't make for a great interview?
Yes, I am. And Taylor was always like super honest with his answers. I don't know. I think as a person, he was a nice guy. I think he was a good locker room guy. I think he was a good teammate. But if you think about what the Bruins middle six looks like in a world where Taylor Hall is still on the team, your second line, your third line, it doesn't have Dan Heinen, right? Dan Heinen's not on this team if Taylor Hall is on this team. And you automatically have a more solid middle six. And once again, this is prefacing it with Hall is not injured. Like Hall has a similar season to the season he was last in Boston. And I just think, you're getting more secondary scoring. You're getting more middle six scoring. You have someone that you could try to tinker with in your lineup. I know Dan Heinen did a good job in the role that he was in, and for the money that he was here for. But he's not Taylor Hall. And obviously the big reason why Taylor Hall is no longer here was his cap hit was much higher than someone like Dan Heinen or Morgan Geekie. So if he's still on the team, their depth is better than their depth scoring. You can't really argue. It would be better than with Geekie and Heinen as and Van Riemsdyk as your guys that you're plugging in.
Well, yeah, and we heard after the season, Cam Neely said they needed more speed. Like Hall would have addressed that this past season and been a big upgrade over anyone else you plugged in there. I will say I did, when we first got this, I did consider Orlov, because I wonder if, with a full training camp preseason, like could he have had better chemistry with Charlie McAvoy, because that didn't really work all that well when he came over. Like, if you remember, he actually ended up playing more kind of in a third pairing role, like, and he bounced around, and then sometimes Grizzly was with McAvoy. Like, that was another spot where they never really settled on, like, the quote-unquote right lineup. They kind of kept moving things around. But But I wonder if he might have been better there with like a fresh start going into a new season. Because let's face it, like McAvoy didn't really have a settled partner most of the season, anyways. Like Grizzly had a down year. We talked about that a ton, and I think that factored into McAvoy having a bit of a down year. So, could there have been more stability there that might have, you know, I don't know, just solidified your back end more all season long and put you in a better spot? Like maybe. So I still go Bertuzzi, but I did consider Orlov.
Well, and it's interesting because when you play it back, when the Bruins brought in Orlov, Hathaway, Bertuzzi at the deadline, that came because Taylor Hall and Nick Foligno were on injured reserve, and maybe even not Forbert, but the Bruins had a couple guys on injured reserve.
Forbert was too.
Forbert was out at the last, yeah.
So those guys came into the lineup, and while other full timers were out of the lineup, and then the Bruins had a short amount of time to try to find chemistry. When the playoffs came around and Hall comes back and Foligno comes back, then Bergeron and Krejci go down. So it's almost like the Bruins had this collection of talent post deadline, but none of them were able to play together as one unit, ironically, until like games, 5, 6, and 7 of the Panthers series. And you look back now and you say, oh, well, that's probably a big reason why they lost, because they didn't have any time to build any chemistry. And it was a lot of their first times playing together as a full unit. And despite all the skill, there was a lack of chemistry. And so it makes me think about going forward. I wonder if teams would be wise if they can pull it off, similar to the Canucks last year, where you identify a team need and you go out there and you be aggressive and you get that before the deadline, because it allows whoever you bring into your group to have more time to find their role and find chemistry. Because as we know, when you bring in players at the deadline, which is for obvious reasons how it goes, it's a sprint. It's a sprint to try to find chemistry, and it doesn't always pay dividends for teams.
I'm telling you guys, like going forward every year, whoever quote unquote wins the deadline because they went all in and made the best trades and got the biggest names, I'm telling you, I'm not picking that team. I said it when we did our deadline episode this year. I said it like half jokingly, but I did believe it, and it ended up being right. I said Vegas isn't repeating. They're not winning the cup. They were the team this year that made the big moves, got Noah Hannafin, Tomas Hertl. They got knocked out in the first round. Like, that's what's going to be my philosophy going forward, because I do think there's something to it. Like, there's just not, because the deadline's so late in the season in March, like, there's just not enough time if you're the team that shakes your roster up that much to really figure it out. And listen, like, eventually someone's going to prove me wrong. There's going to be a team that goes all in, makes 3 huge trades, and wins the cup. Like, that's going to happen at some point, but I don't think it's like a coincidence that the Bruins couldn't figure it out after their big deadline, and this past year Vegas couldn't. Oddly enough, like, they didn't learn from when they won the cup, making just like a couple smaller moves. Like, Ivan Barbashev was their big trade the year that they won the cup, and he's a good player and who just happened to be the right fit. But that wasn't a huge shakeup. I mean, Florida winning this year, like, their big move was Vladimir Tarasenko, who wound up being on their third line in the playoffs. Like, it was a good move for an experienced player who had won a cup before, but it wasn't a huge shakeup. Like, it wasn't a superstar move.
It's funny. It's almost like those third line players are the ones that end up being the biggest game changers. Look in Boston, right? 2011, it's Peverley and Kelly, and then Cabriolet in your third D pair. 2013, they already kind of had that cup roster, so they sprinkled in Yager. And then 2019, you bring in Coyle and Johansson. Like, there's something to be said about the deadline completing your roster rather than trying to significantly increase the talent. You know what I mean? I mean, sometimes it's both at the same time, but
because you just remind me of it, we don't talk enough about how bizarre the Jaromir Jagr in Boston era was. Like,
not one goal off his ass. That was it.
So strange. So unbelievably strange.
Yeah, I know.
He was just playing a different game than the entire rest of the team. Like, he just slowed it down, held onto the puck, and it was like, I don't know if this was producing good things or not, but like,
Just let him do him. You can't even question him at that point because he's Jaromir Jagr and he's you can't really even say anything. But now you're derailing my thought that I was.
Oh, sorry, Bridget. Get back to it. Sorry about that.
I don't even remember anymore.
This wasn't. What if they never traded for Jaromir Jagr?
No, it wasn't. We do have some like older school ones that we will get to. We're gonna do a specific episode on some of the ones we got. Like we got some about Moog and Joe Thornton, and we've got some old ones.
What if Casper Dogovins scored on a wide open net in Game 1 of the 2013 Finals? But remember that year he had a shootout against Tuukka Rask and put the toe of his stick on the puck and just made an absolute ass of himself for the Senators and didn't score. And then the Bruins, Peter Chiarelli was like, "Yeah, we just got to get him for the fourth line." So stupid. Oh gosh, there's a lot of what ifs out there, but
yeah. I mean, our entire season is just like, especially in the playoffs, it's like, what if they just didn't do that? Like, what if? I don't know. And goaltending was such a big what if the last 2 seasons because you have 2 guys that at any given time might have been the right answer. And you didn't really know. We don't know what the world looks like if Jeremy Swayman, starts in 2023, which I don't think they would have ever done that to start the series because you had a Vezina Trophy winner. But what if they switched to Swayman earlier? Perfectly valid what if. Guys.
What if Glenn Wesley doesn't go over the net? What if the lights don't go out in the old Boston Garden? So, listeners, we want all sorts of what ifs dating back as far as you can go.
I'm not sure how much I can add to those. I'm not gonna for the ones I wasn't alive for. I'm not gonna lie. I don't know. I'll have to do a lot of research. Yeah.
That's okay. But yeah, this is a good first one. Hopefully everybody enjoyed listening to it. Bridget, Scott, any other things you wanted to go over before we signed off?
I don't think so. Not really much happening.
No. Yeah. And just by the way, if you want to get yours in, you can email us here, skatepod@weei. I think I got it right. I made this lovely graphic. Or do what you already did, some of you guys, and just tweet at us or comment.
Yeah, or comment on YouTube. All of it. Still no Swayman news, guys. So
yeah, I mean, I'm still not worried about it. I guess if October comes around and there's no signing, then maybe I'll start to get concerned. But I think I just don't see it not happening.
Speaking of Swayman and goalies, though, we do have an episode with Razor coming up. That'll be dropped sometime next week.
Yep. Should be early August for our first guest in our guest series, Razor. All right, guys. I think that is it for today. We're good? We're good.
All good.
All right.
All set. Yep. Thank you all for listening. We'll talk to you very soon. Hey guys, thanks for watching the Skate Podcast. If you want to see more of our videos, visit our playlist.
Not in front of a screen? You can listen to us on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you get your podcasts.
Don't forget to follow us on social media. And if you enjoyed this video, please don't forget to give us a thumbs up, subscribe to our channel, and leave a comment.